Thank you for joining the Change I Am Possible, which is India's first future tech meets sustainability podcast. And today I'm delighted and honored to have with me Ms. Chiu, who's the global director at Wunderman Thompson's in-house think tank, Wunderman Thompson Intelligence, a futurism research and innovation unit. They have also recently co-authored the new report titled Into the Metaverse, which I believe is a must-read. And anybody who wants to know about Metaverse, I think should dig into it because it's filled with insights to understand what Metaverse is and how you can leverage the opportunity. There is so much hype, Emma, around Metaverse, and Facebook recently has actually pivoted from being a social network company and they're calling themselves a Metaverse company and even rebranded themselves as Meta. So can we start by explaining what is the Metaverse, why there is so much hype, and why do we actually need it?
So it's definitely something that we've been seeing over the past year. It's a project that me and my team have been thinking about, and it didn't necessarily start off with, Metaverse as we know it today. It started with understanding how technology and gaming infrastructure has really accelerated during the pandemic. And that's extending into virtual venues, into a way where people can meet, interact, buy, sell, create. And it's becoming a space where people are increasingly spending their time. So these virtual worlds, as we understand it, is what we're moving into what we're calling the metaverse. But I think there are stages of the metaverse. So I would say this is the initial stage of the metaverse where they are a series of virtual worlds. The next stage of where I think the metaverse will be heading is it becoming a series of interconnected virtual worlds. So at the moment, these virtual places where people go, say they're in games, so it could be Fortnite or Roblox, they're all separate. They all exist as separate entities, but perhaps in the future, at some point, they'll be interconnected. So the same avatar that you create, wherever you create it, it can go between these different worlds, and perhaps these virtual assets that you'd be buying from one world, you can take it into another world. So that's where I see the metaverse heading, and ultimately where the metaverse would really go to is extending beyond just the virtual space, but having the virtual and physical worlds truly converge and come together.
We are discovering, maybe another world of sorts, a world with endless possibilities. And these designers of today could reinvent or virtual reality itself, the metaverse that we're building, because I'm sure, there'll be rules which we have to live by, the same like we live in a physical world. We've got rules, there'll be certain rules over there. But I think we will be, for once, maybe we'll be able to transcend, go beyond imagination, because I guess the opportunities of what we are building is going to be humongous. You rightfully pointed out that because of COVID, technology is accelerated and gaming has seen a humongous growth of sorts. The social media network where people used to all gather is kind of changing. There's a shift because there is a larger group of people now gathering on these gaming platforms. They're socially gathering over there. They are buying these digital assets. They are trading them, and they're building a community of sorts. So you said, this is like the first layer of what we are building, and there's going to be multi-layers to it. It's going to be interconnected. So I'm excited for that future. In Wunderman Thompson Intelligence, you've been doing a lot of research on emerging tech and future trends. So what were the trends or insights that nudged you into Metaverse? Why Metaverse as such?
Yeah, so I would say one of the key drivers of it would be what we call new gaming frontiers. So how gaming, video games, even that term now feels somewhat outdated, because gaming itself has really transcended from something as a hobby or entertainment to far more than that. Like, we're able to go into games to meet people, to socialize, to be creative, as you mentioned, this sense of creativity that you can really up level within games is something that people, especially younger generation, are really keen to explore and do more of. So now we're seeing games have somewhat what we're calling like a multi-layered gameplay. So you're able to, have the adventure or have the game that you're actually engaging with. But there's this element of curation of what you want your avatar to be wearing, want them to look like, the color. There's this sort of very creative element of it. And increasingly that element, which was more of a sidebar before, is being dialed up. And, I have a 7-year-old niece, and when she plays the game Fall Guys, she actually spends a good 50% of that game looking at the outfits, choosing that versus playing the actual game. So I think, the way we're engaging with games is very different. And to be honest, I think that Travis Scott, a shame what happened more recently, but the virtual Fortnite concert was a huge game changer, where there were millions of people who were able to engage in this virtual live venue. And they were able to experience something at the same time. And I think that made it huge for people thinking about events or conferences or thought leadership summits, or perhaps even our podcast could be done within a gaming space. So the way you're able to interact and in these 3D environments is creating this sense of what we're calling social presence. So it feels like you're truly in that space, like in real life, at the same time with other people. And, if you think about in a live concert venue in the physical space, they're able to hold maximum thousands of people, whereas now we're thinking far larger. So the idea of accessibility is also something very attractive for a lot of advertisers, event organizers, and marketers.
Right. Yeah. There is so much opportunity. You pointed out towards the Travis Scott event, which was held on Fortnite. And there was, I think, a couple of millions who were present. The youth, they are going towards there. But for the people who are a little old, for them, it's a little unfathomable, because, how can this shift happen? Because so far we've been so used to attending concerts physically. Now, here's the opportunity that you can actually create virtual environments in virtual worlds, and the end user can be wearing these virtual outfits, interacting with different people from around the world. You could be standing on the stage, you could be flying, and the limitations are almost that there's no limits of sort. And you mentioned that gamification itself, the game, you cannot call these traditional gaming just gaming anymore, because they are seeping inside almost every different sectors. There is this gamification of everything. The traditional education industry is approaching, a gamified approach to educate. There is the work where training people, they are looking at a gamified training approach, and there is a lot of retention, when you do things like that. Would you like to talk a little bit about the use cases? You mentioned that your live events could be one of those use cases, and then if we could just gamify like a whole lot of things. Could you just a little simplify a bit for my audience on where are the low-hanging fruits of this metaverse, and what could be the applications of this?
Yeah, so something that we've been talking to quite a lot of our clients about is, if more people are spending time in these gaming spaces, therefore, this is where all the eyeballs are. So if you're a marketer, if you're an advertiser, a brand, this is kind of where you want to have a sense of presence. So, I would say Animal Crossing is another example of a game that really excelled during the pandemic. And a lot of brands, rather than creating their own version of Animal Crossing, they participated. So they created their own islands. They hired island, gaming designer to create a branded version of an island where people can go and visit it. And it was a way to show that their brand is aware of, gaming. They can be part of it. They can create something very creative and innovative. and also connect with that audience who's already engaged in that space. Roblox, Fortnite, these are Minecraft. There are some other examples of games that are really working hard on brand partnerships, so that brands can actually create a world or have presence within these games without it seeming odd or forced. Because I think that is another area to really watch out for, is when brands are forcing themselves within a game and it just feels very odd. And I think especially the younger generation are going to be very quick to point out and criticize that. So another thing to really watch out is really strategize the game that you think is right for you, the way you want to be present within the game, and ultimately, what do you want to, say or do with the audience that you're reaching out to? Because it's not good enough nowadays just to have a banner or have your brand logo on something. It needs to be far more engaging than that. So we have examples like Vans and Hyundai. They've created these branded worlds, gaming worlds within Roblox. And I think that's quite interesting, particularly for Hyundai, because they're a car company and they created this branded world within Roblox. And Roblox is well known for having a very young audience. So 67% of Roblox players are under 16. They're not able to buy a car. And I think really the premise of that for Hyundai is to have a sense of brand connection with the younger generation. So they're not trying to tap into that market the moment they get a driving license. They want to have a connection with them much earlier. So it's thinking about things like this and strategizing in that way and really changing how you think about the brand, how you think about engagement and showing off their technology and capabilities. That's another thing that I think a lot of brands should be thinking about when they're kind of moving into this gaming space. But, I can go on about this forever. But, it also extends into retail and e-commerce. The way we visit a website, no longer is it going to be like this 2D, very flat website. It's far more immersive. It's going to have these sense of gaming capabilities where you're moving into a 3D store and environment where you're able to spontaneously find something. And I think these are things that we're lacking at the moment. And a lot of technologists and companies are working really hard to bring that to life.
You mentioned that, the brands need to relook at, not just connecting with the audience, but engaging it in a much deeper way, where there is a deeper connection or bond of sorts, where you are not just looking at monetizing, at the go, but, creating a connection where that maybe these young people will be your end users in the long run. Now, so far, all our traditional, brand engagement has been, extremely passive of sorts. It's been the print, it's the radio, television commercials, and now we have the digital medium. But the digital, which is somewhat interactive, but it's still kind of passive, And then we are getting into the augmented reality, virtual reality, mixed reality world, where some of the largest companies in the world are working on building a headset like this, which could come in another few years, which will converge from your mobile and a computer into one single wearable head device. And you mentioned also that we will not be engaging with just these websites, 2D websites. We'll be engaging with the 3D world, because the metaverse will be 2D and 3D, and it'll be like a amalgamation of all of these technologies, AI, IoT, blockchain, XR, and that's where the metaverse will be born. Now, it all sounds exciting for the young and the ones who want to explore, but the ones that there are obviously these traditional legacy brands who don't want to move because they're so comfortable with the way they've been functioning. What happens to them? How deeply do you think they are going to get impacted? And does this mean that the world it has more opportunity for small, agile companies rather than those big companies?
Yeah, really good question, Eddie. I would say, the internet has been a huge game changer for companies. If you think about it, Google, Amazon, they were born in the mid-90s. And look at the size of the company that they are now and how reliant a lot of people are on them. I would say in the 90s, we were asking, what is the internet? And a lot of companies, particularly luxury brands, were very rejecting the idea of having a website. And look at where we are now in 2020s. It's almost crazy if you don't have a sort of digital presence. So I would say by not participating in the metaverse or not engaging with it would be quite similar to not engaging with the internet in the 90s. So I think it's almost a miss for brands not to do that. But today we're at a point where a lot of companies already have a digital presence. And this is something that when we ran our survey with a lot of consumers, they think that brands need to have a digital presence in order to be successful in the future. And in fact, we have 62% say they have a deeper connection with brands and deeper relationship with brands that have a strong digital presence. So not only by having a sort of digital presence are you able to kind of extend your reach to more people, but you're also creating a stronger relationship with them that deepens this connection. And brand loyalty is something that we've been like really grappling with, because especially the younger generation is like, they want one thing one moment and then they switch and they want something else, and suddenly TikTok takes over and you're like, where did this come from? So it's kind of like getting ahead and understanding what these trends are within the digital space and how to connect with the younger audience, because very much like, why are we talking so much about the younger audience? Because they're at the moment the ones dictating a lot of the trends.
Right. Would you like to talk about your recent report into the metaverse, and would you like to share updates or any insights, which can be leveraged by the brands?
Essentially, it's a compact report where we wanted to get ahead and really unpack and understand the nuances of what the metaverse is. So we're able to answer that question, because I think, over the last, particularly during the summer, a lot of news outlets were asking the question, what is a metaverse? Are we there yet? What does it mean? What's NFTs? Crypto people are getting into it. Gaming is, already experiencing it. And brands are kind of like dipping their toes into this space. But what does it truly mean? So we wanted to be the agency who gets ahead and takes a deep dive into the metaverse, have a very strong perspective and point of view on what this new paradigm means for brands. And attached to that, we interviewed 15 plus experts around the world in different metaverse spaces. And we asked them what the metaverse means for them. And from this information, we actually have a chart in there which dissects what the metaverse is. So there's lots of elements that make up the metaverse, and also have our own key takeaways of, what this means for brands. So there's 5 key takeaways at the very end, which unpacks different elements of the metaverse, what to remember and how to be part of it. So it's really like an instructional study for brands to look at, engage with, see different aspects that they can be part of. So, different areas that we talk about include virtual possessions, which I think is going to be really big. Gamification, as we talked about, gaming, the gaming industry is bigger than the movie and music business combined. So it's crazy for brands to ignore gaming. And then we also have a space where we talk about the workforce. How is the metaverse changing the way employees and companies are operating when they're working remotely, and how it probably will help decentralize, headquarters and make people feel more connected and work better on projects together. So these are a few areas that we explore. And one other thing just to note is that we ran a consumer survey, a bespoke consumer survey, really testing and understanding where people are at with technology. And that survey was conducted in the US, UK, and China. So we get a good sense of where people feel about technology. And interestingly enough, I think people are very positive about tech. 88% of consumers say they feel very positive about technology. And a lot of people think that, tech can actually help create a more sustainable and equitable future?
I would double that, because I think tech is great. It's the humans, the choice that they do. I mean, how they choose to use tech can go in a wrong direction. I will surely link the Into the Metaverse report onto the website. NFTs. Would you like to talk a little bit about that and explain that? Because it gets a little overwhelming for the people who don't understand about this.
So NFTs, non-fungible tokens, is something that really came to light when Christie sold an artwork for millions. And that really set the tone for how much a digital asset is worth, a unique digital asset is worth. And as a result of that, it's created a whole new marketplace. It's definitely a game changer when it comes to digital possessions, as we're going to see more and more of that. How can you have digital possessions that is going to be unique to you? And when we think about digital possessions, I always remind people it's not just about fashion. It's, Ferrari, Tesla, the auto industry have been creating digital assets. You also have homes, digital homes that's being sold as well. So the scale of what you could be creating as digital possession that people could be buying is pretty vast. And Beeple, the artist, his artwork prior to the sale that he had, that was in the millions, was just sold for like $100, prior to this. So it is a really rich space for artists and creatives. And this is something that you talked about earlier, how the metaverse can be really rich for creativity.
Now, when the internet was designed by Sir Tim Berners-Lee, it was supposed to be a decentralized platform. But then eventually it became these wall gardens hidden behind paywalls and things like that. Since you have done a lot of research in this, what's your insight or foresight into this? Where do you think the metaverse is going? Is it going to be a centralized one metaverse, or it's going to be a decentralized platform which is open for all?
Yes, so I think there's a lot of larger companies who want to create a very centralized and dominate the metaverse. I always look at where people are at. I look at people's attitudes and insights and how they're engaging with society and changing culture. What we're seeing is that actually people are not allowing that to happen. People, as much as they are attached or loyal to certain brands, when it comes to their digital space, they don't want it to be owned by one company. It's impossible for the metaverse ultimately to be owned by one company or have a few key dominating companies. There is going to be a scale as such, but ultimately it's going to be the people who own the metaverse, because if no one's engaging in it, the metaverse won't exist. And increasingly people want, and again, I refer back to gaming, people want games that they don't have to buy a specific console to play that game. They want to be able to play that game, yes, on the console, but also on their laptops, on their PCs, on their phones. They want to be able to play these games across different platforms. So already the way these gaming companies are thinking about how they want to distribute, these virtual worlds, it needs to be across all these different platforms. And, the ideal would be to create a decentralized metaverse. And it's very key now because, the metaverse as we know it is in its infancy. And this is a key time to be shaping the metaverse and participating in what that future of the metaverse could look like. That's kind of the ideal of the metaverse, but we shall see. So I'll be tracking this.
I hope that we create a metaverse which is decentralized, more open, more opportunity for everyone, like an equitable future of sorts, because today the world is so divided and is so unequal. There's 1% of the entire global population owns 99% of the entire wealth. And I think that there's so much wrongs in the world. We create these big companies, and the big companies, it solves one problem, then it creates another problem. We're not looking at creating sustainable, equitable, circular economies. I think we need to relook at everything, all the wrongs that we have done, and for the first time, because we've got the tools, technology is giving us the opportunity to correct the wrongs. So I hope that the future of the metaverse is, what we're building is equitable for all. Thank you, Emma, for sharing time, being part of the podcast. You have been really vested in futurism and catching all these trends. You've also done the Future 100 report. So would you like to leave us with maybe some foresights or trends, what you see is something which India or Indians should look out for?
Yeah, so I think there's a lot, and I guess it's no surprise when I talk about, sustainability and needing to create a sustainable future is something that's increasingly important, not just for India, but for the world. And it's an issue that more and more people are enforcing, but we're moving on from sustainability now. We're starting to talk about regeneration. So we see that, being sustainable is kind of doing less bad, but really being regenerative is actually giving a lot more back to nature, to the earth. And ultimately that health of the planet will boost the health of us. So for example, more recently in the news where there was a lot of fireworks and it created a lot of smog and pollution in India. I think it was in Delhi. And, when you see stuff like that, it's not to say, let's not celebrate. Of course, we want to celebrate, but let's find more sustainable ways of celebrating in a future that won't pollute our air that we're all breathing and our children are breathing in. So it's kind of being mindful and thinking about things like that. And how can we give back to the planet? And how can we create brands that are regenerative or companies that are regenerative to really have a prosperous future that our younger generation will look forward to growing up in and want to bring children into the world. So we're starting to hear more and more Gen Zers already making the decision to not have children because they feel like the world that they're bringing their children into is not that desirable. So it's quite sad when you think of the younger generation already thinking like this, that they're quite anxious and worried about the future. So it's kind of working towards creating a future that we want to live in. And in order to do that, it's making sure we're living in a sustainable and regenerative future. So that's one area. Another, I would say, is, India particularly has been having a very hard time with the pandemic and COVID. And it's slowly coming out to that. There's a lot of disparity between the rich and the poor. But I think we're experiencing that globally too. And now moving into 2022, one thing that we're seeing a little bit more of is this sense of strength being paired with joy and happiness, and wanting to remind ourselves, being happy and being joyful is something that's very human after all. But I felt like in the last year and a half, 2 years, we've been suppressing that because of the pandemic. It feels a bit, tone deaf to be too happy. But increasingly, brands are trying to tap into that emotion and try to bring this sense of joy to people. So how can you pass on this sense of something that's very human to people around you and extend it to the societies? So there are two things that we're talking about within the report for next year. And just one last thing is what we're calling actually someone else has been calling it the Great Reassessment. So during, I think, the pandemic has pushed a lot of people into recession, and the recession meant people lost a lot of jobs, not of their choice. Then in 2021, people had time to really reevaluate and rethink. In the next year, upcoming year, people are going to start thinking about what's important in their life. So it may not necessarily be, a job that pays well. It could be a job that, pays well, but also has the same values that they have. So aligning their values and really pushing companies to do better. So that's definitely something we're seeing a lot more of. And this is going to be trickling to other sectors too. So there are a few things that I would say is specific to India, but also the world. I think we're going through a global experience at the moment.
Right. I think so profound. I think we're going to a global experience of sorts, and I think we are all in it together. We need to own up to our mistakes. You rightfully pointed out that Diwali recently because of Diwali, the air was filled with smog, and we need to relook at how we celebrate. You need to understand that everything is causal, and we need to correct the wrongs. And if we do that, I think we'll create a better planet. And you also said that I think life is about having fun. It's about enjoying. And we've somehow missed that, because I think everybody is running blindly towards the greens or the money. But I think, what is the use of a lot of money if it does not give you inner peace? I think we need to ask those deeper questions, where we want a future to be heading. Do we want a world where we are constantly consuming, we are not conserving, and creating a world which is dying, or create a world which is sustainable for all and equitable for all? I think these are deeper questions we all need to ask, and maybe try and correct those wrongs, because I think for the first time we've got the opportunity to do that. So Emma, it was a pleasure and delight to be talking to you. Thank you for sharing your insights with us. We wish you the very best, you and your team. And to my listeners, if you like what you see and hear, then please press the subscribe button. Until next time, see you guys. Bye-bye. Thank you, Emma. Really appreciate this.
Thank you so much, Eddie. That was so fun.